Hello everyone, and now let's move on to the story of a person who encountered a werewolf who stole his magic. My name is Myuu, and this story happened to me in 2009, when I was 43 years old, and it was in the city of Santa Barbara do Oeste, which is in Brazil. And to start the story, today I am an evangelical or Protestant Christian, but at the time of this event, I was a macumbeiro, which is a religion here in Brazil that came from Africa, and I used to do various witchcraft jobs for people, such as making husbands return to their wives, making people's lives better, separating couples, harming people in their financial lives, and other things, but I was paid to do these magic jobs, but I usually did these services at night. But one night, I went to do a sorcery work near a copse of trees almost on the way out of town, and this place was poorly lit, and hardly any people passed by, and as usual, I left my sorcery work there, and it was a plate of chicken with flour and pepper, and also a bottle of pinga, which was offered to the demonic spirits, and after I finished the dispatch, I left for my house to rest. But the next morning, I had to go back to the place where I'd made that magic dispatch, and when I got there, I saw that my plate with the sorcery work was all overturned, and I got angry about that, and I went to look to see if I could find any clues as to who might have done it. But what I saw of what was left of the plate was the flour, but they'd taken the chicken, and the strangest thing was that the bottle of pinga hadn't been touched. So for me, that mess that happened with my magic dispatch must have been some dog passing by that did it. A few days later, I did the magic work again. I waited until Friday to do it again, but I didn't think any more about whether some animal might have passed by and messed up my work again, because the other time this had happened, for me it was just something that happened by chance. Anyway, arriving on Friday night, I walked to the bush to make the magic dispatch, so I left the offering there near the bush, as I always did. Then I left for my house, and when dawn broke, I was curious to pass by the place, to see if nothing had happened to the dispatch I had left in the street, so I walked through the streets, and when I got there, I saw that everything was messed up again with my work, and again, the chicken was gone, and the bottle of pinga hadn't been touched, so I was worried, because it could be a person or some animal that was doing this to me, and that it was getting in the way of my witchcraft service, and I was also worried about doing work here, and ending up doing it again, finding my dispatch all overturned. At that moment, I got nervous and thought to myself, I'm going to find out who's doing this. But as the days went by, I was talking to some friends, and I found out that a beggar who was new to the city, and he was hanging around near where I made the offerings. At first, I looked for this homeless man around the city and managed to find him. I started talking to this beggar to find out if he was the one who was messing up my despacho and eating chicken from my offerings. And the Andarillo told me that it wasn't him, and that he was afraid of messing with this kind of thing, that it was evil, and that he didn't want to become more disgraced in life, as he already was, and this man also said, if it was him, he would certainly take the bottle of pinga too. And looking at it this way, for me, the Andarillo wouldn't be a suspect, because the bottle of cachaco was left there, and wasn't touched. But what I found strange about this homeless man was that when I was talking to him, I noticed that his teeth were too perfect. He didn't have any rotten or broken teeth, and they were very clean, things that were hard to see in people who lived in his conditions. And so as not to upset this homeless man any further, I didn't ask him any more questions, and this wanderer asked me to buy him a drink, and that day, I was out of money, but I promised this guy that next time, I would buy him a hot drink. After I'd had this conversation with this guy, I left for my home. When I got home, I wondered who could be messing up my magical work, whether it was an animal or a person, because I didn't have any declared enemies in the city, but normally, people didn't like to get close to me, because I was a Macambero at the time. And after a few days, Friday arrived and I took another chicken and pinga offering, but this one was a fake, because I put a lot of crushed pepper inside the chicken. I stayed close by hiding, behind some bushes, and I was about 30 meters away from the place where I put the fake offering. I kept watching the offering, because I was so angry at what was happening to my magic that I decided to stay there until dawn, so that I could find out who it was that had come to destroy my work in those woods. Well, I was already there, around 11 o'clock at night, and as time went by, it soon got close to 1 o'clock in the morning, and since at this time of day you hardly hear any noise, you can hear any sound, even if it's low. Suddenly, I started to hear some rustling noises coming from the undergrowth, and some deep, rapid breathing, mixed with a kind of growl. I got scared of these strange noises, and crouched down, and that's when I saw a kind of dog-like animal coming out of the undergrowth, but this animal, as well as having a strange appearance, was huge, much bigger than a dog, and this creature had a dark coat, and what really frightened me was its eyes, which seemed to be two yellow lights on, and looking closely, it looked a lot like a deformed monkey, but it had a snout like a dog's. I stood there hiding behind the bushes in shock, and I couldn't even run, because my legs stopped. At that moment, out of fear, my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my throat, because I couldn't even run away from the place, because this creature would surely come after me and catch me easily. So I stayed there hiding, just waiting for this creature to come out of there, so that I could leave. So I was scared, but I couldn't take my eyes off this beast, because if it knew I was there, then I would be in more danger. But then I realized that this beast was looking down the street to see if anyone was around, and this seemed to be a reaction of this animal, which was a very intelligent move, as if it were a human. So this creature went to smell the offerings, and then it started chewing on the chicken, which I had put a lot of chili peppers on, and at that moment I thought, this is going to go to shit. This beast began to chew the chicken quickly, and then he began to feel the burning of the chili peppers in his mouth, and he began to spit out the chicken, and also, this creature was confused at this point, and grunting in pain from the burning effect of the chili peppers, and he didn't know what to do. The creature began to put its claws through its mouth, but it was no use, and with all this trouble, the werewolf despaired, and suddenly this creature got up, and stood like a man, and it balanced on two legs, and even walked a bit upright, and this beast was about the size of a man. But it scratched your face with its clawed nails desperately, and this beast was hurting itself. I realized that this creature was a werewolf. But in all this action, the creature quickly ran into the bushes and disappeared from the place, and I was afraid. I stayed there behind the bushes. I waited about 5 minutes to see if the creature would return or not, but it didn't return. So I took advantage and ran from that place and went to my residence, even though I was scared along the way. When I got home, I kept thinking back to that moment I spent with this creature, and its image kept coming to mind, because I never thought I would meet such a beast one day. The fact is that after a week had passed since my encounter with the werewolf, I stopped doing my sorcery work out of fear. One day, when I was passing a bar in my village, I saw some homeless people and some drunks in front of the bar, and I remembered that I owed a debt of a glass of pinga to Anderillo dos Dentes Benitos. So I went into the bar to see if I could find this guy to pay this debt, but I didn't find him there. Afterwards, I asked some men who were in the bar about this Andarilho who owed me a glass of pinga, and I was amazed at what I heard in the bar, because they told me that this beggar with the beautiful teeth, who I was going to pay for a pinga, had disappeared from the area, and no one has seen him around the neighborhood since. I also learned that the last time this man was seen, his mouth and face were all scratched and bruised. I also found out that the dogs of the homeless people were afraid of him, and the dogs didn't like this guy. However, as soon as I heard all these stories, I left the bar and thought about the possibility of that man being the werewolf I saw, because according to the information, he had already been seen walking a few times, near where he was doing the dispatches, and where the creature appeared, and its teeth were very well groomed, despite the fact that he was a homeless man, and now the guy has turned up with his mouth and face all cut up and bruised. For me, everything indicates that yes, he was the most suspected of becoming this creature, because on the day that the werewolf ate the chicken with pepper, this creature desperately scratched part of his face and mouth, and then ran away. Of course, I even tried to see if I could meet that wanderer in town, but to this day, he hasn't turned up, and I even went back to make a dispatch, near the woods where the animal appeared, but I was driving. But it so happened that I no longer had this problem with my dispatches being destroyed, and this helped me to become more suspicious of that homeless man. And if you ever see a homeless person with good teeth, be wary, he could be a werewolf. So the question remains, was Andarilho the werewolf? And that was my real account of what I went through with the werewolf. Well, if you like this story, leave a like. It helps the video grow. Until the next horror stories. Fear Zone Channel, your channel of terror. Good evening everyone, and now we go to today's story, which is from Mr. Mario, and this happened to him in the city of Nova Odessa, which is in the state of Sao Paulo, and was in the year 2003, when Mr. Mario was 21 years old. And today, I will tell you something unforgettable that I lived in my life, because the werewolf that I saw was doing his evil deeds in my town. And it all starts like this. I live in a village in the rural area, which is far from the city center. But a certain time of year, there was a corn harvest in my city, where several people came from all states and cities of Brazil to work in these plantations. But then the harvest season began, and a few months went by. But it was also the time for the June festival, and there was a big event in a place near my neighborhood, where several workers who harvested corn also came to have fun at this festival. The fact is, I went to this party with my cousin and his friend, and we three were having fun all night at this party. But not long after, my cousin got into a fight with a guy at this event, and my friend helped my cousin to beat up a lot this stranger, and I saw that they could kill this man. I stopped the fight, and after that we left, not to get more trouble. The next day, we went back to our normal lives, but I learned that the guy who was beaten by my cousin worked as a corn picker, and his face was all swollen and bruised. However, as soon as about 2 weeks passed, I was amazed by something that happened in my village, because my friend, who helped my cousin beat up the stranger at the party, was allegedly killed by a large animal on a dirt road near our neighborhood, and when he was returning from his work at night, an animal attacked him viciously, taking his life. After that, a month passed and my cousin told me that he saw an animal that was hiding in a vacant lot in front of his house, and he suspected that it could have been this beast that killed our friend on the road. Well, with all this story, the people in my neighborhood were afraid to go out during the day or at night in the village because of this beast. The fact is, the police and the fire department stayed a few days after this animal that killed my friend, but the military and the fire department found nothing. But to my surprise, what I learned in this search for the beast is that the corn picker that we fought about at the party, the police had taken him to the police station because they caught him walking through the woods at dawn, and that he was suspected of taking clothes from the clotheslines of the houses. Well, after a while, the harvest season was over, and the harvesters had already returned to their towns, and my cousin was still scared of the beast that he had seen the other day in the bush, but he told me that he had not seen this animal again, and my cousin also said that this beast was not a normal animal because he had a glow in his eyes that was scary for anyone, and his appearance was like a monkey and dog mixed together. I got a little pensive in this story if this creature had something to do with my friend who died attacked by a strange animal. Well, almost 6 months passed, and the corn harvest started again in my town, and with it the harvest workers, a few of them began to appear around my neighborhood. One night I was in a bar drinking, and soon I saw that the guy who fought with my friend and my cousin last year at the party, and this man was drinking at a table in the bar, and I noticed that sometimes this guy looked at me in a strange way, as if he already knew me from somewhere. Anyway, when it was already dark, the bar closed, and my cousin and I left together to our homes, and started walking through some dirt roads in our neighborhood. However, when we arrived at my house, my cousin took another street and was walking alone through the dirt road to his residence. I soon opened my gate, but suddenly I heard someone running down the street, and it was my cousin. He was running away from something, and then a creature came running after my cousin down the street, and it was a weird big animal, but luckily for him, I opened my gate quickly, and my cousin managed to escape by entering my house, and I quickly closed my gate, and just as I was about to pass the chains to lock my gate, surprisingly, that beast arrived in front of the house running, and soon. This being already stood up and stood on 2 legs, even standing, like a person, and to my surprise, this creature began to pull my gate with his hands to open it, and this beast growled of rage at me, trying to intimidate me, and he swung my gate with great fury, and I also held the gate for the creature not to enter the house. But soon my cousin appeared holding a wooden handle, and gave several strokes in the hands of the creature, in which the beast released his hands from my gate. At that moment this monster began to roll on the ground and growled in pain, and it was scary the noises that this werewolf made, but then, this beast got up, and ran on foot down the street growling with noises of suffering, and it went into the woods and disappeared. At this, I took advantage and closed my gate quickly with the chains and padlock. My cousin and I entered my house, and we watched to see if the creature was around, but we saw nothing. I took a machete to defend myself, in case the creature decided to come back and try to enter my residence, and my cousin was even more afraid because I didn't have a firearm at home. My cousin told me that it was this beast that had appeared in front of his house last year, and that maybe it was this werewolf that killed our friend on the road as well. In all this conversation, time went by, and I came to the conclusion that this animal was a werewolf. For this creature stood upright, and his body was like a man's from the waist up, but his legs were a little crooked back, like an animal's, and his head was like a dog's, with big pointed ears, and although his face looked like a man's, this werewolf had a mouth like a dog's, and with the dark hair on his body this beast had a macabre and scary appearance. Anyway, we stayed up all night, and the werewolf did not appear, but also this creature took a blow to his hands with the wooden handle when he tried to open the gate, and this werewolf must have been very injured. And I, and my cousin, did not understand what was happening, that this beast was trying to catch us, because it was the second time that my cousin saw this beast. Well, the fact is, the day dawned, I went to work normally, and so when it was time for lunch, I went to the pharmacy to buy medicine for a headache, because I had not slept well, because the werewolf had disturbed my sleep. But to my surprise, when I arrived at the door of the pharmacy, that corn picker who had fought with my cousin, and he was making a huge bandage on his two hands with the help of the pharmacist, and it seemed to be a serious injury. However, this man saw me there on the counter, and this stranger disguised himself quickly and got a scared look on his face as if he owed me something, and I realized this because he was quite amazed to see me. But then it hit me, because I immediately thought that he was the suspect of being the werewolf that attacked us at dawn, because of the bandages on his hands, which is where my cousin hurt the werewolf, and I also thought that he was getting back at our friend, because he got beaten at the party, and tried to get my cousin for helping to beat him. This suspect quickly left the pharmacy and disappeared down the street. Then I warned my cousin about the situation and the danger we were in. We soon started to patrol the town looking for the suspect, but we didn't see this man anywhere else. And the other days, we learned that he was away from his work, and the other workers said that this guy left town before the harvest season was over. But a few years have passed, and the werewolf no longer appeared in my neighborhood, but still, when it happens new harvests of corn in my town, I am worried that the guy who fought with my cousin back, and if he appears someday, I'll be very smart, because the werewolf can appear again too, and want to finish his revenge. Well folks, thanks for watching the video, and if you like it, subscribe to the channel to receive new werewolf stories. See you next time. Fear Zone, your horror channel. Good evening everyone, and today, I'm going to tell you something more than unbelievable, because I discovered on a night of terror that werewolves can attack in packs, but luckily, I'm alive, and I can tell you about this haunted story. But before I start, subscribe to the channel and leave your like to receive our new videos every week. And now, let's move on to today's story, which is about Mr. Nelson, and it happened to him in the city of Paulo Afonso, which is in Brazil, and at the time it was 2002, Mr. Nelson was 24 years old. And it all started like this. I live in a simple village in my town, but at a certain time in my life, I got a job on a farm near my neighborhood, and my job there was to look after the animals, and tidy up the stables and wooden fences, and on this farm, there was a caretaker who lived in a house on the property with his family. However, I only spent the week inside the farm. I slept in a little room, but I went back to my house in my neighborhood on weekends. But one day, the caretaker of this farm told me something very strange, because he said that a few months ago, they found a man all broken up and with several dog bite marks, and that the man was lying on a dirt road near the farm, and that no one knew the man, because he was a person that no one had ever seen in the area. But to my amazement, the caretaker also said that it was certainly him who had done this to that strange guy, and the caretaker continued to tell me his story, and here comes the part that really haunted me, because the caretaker revealed that one morning, he woke up to the barking of the dogs around the farm, and he took a piece of wood in his hands and went to see what was going on. So he started walking around the farm, and that's when he saw the dogs looking for something near the fence, and when the foreman approached the dogs, something came out from behind the wooden fence, jumping on the caretaker to try and catch him, but the foreman quickly saw that black figure and managed to dodge the attack in time. But even so, when he turned around to look at what it was that had attacked him, the farm dogs, which were two Rottweilers, were already surrounding the invading animal. But the caretaker saw that the animal that had entered the farm also looked like it was some kind of dog, but it was much bigger than the farm dogs. Finally, the farm dogs and the invading creature began to face each other, and after a few growls between the animals, a nasty fight broke out between the dogs and the invading creature. The three dogs rolled around on the ground, biting each other violently, and the caretaker saw that the fight between the animals was even, he took the wooden handle in his hands, and to help his dogs, he managed to land several blows on the head and back of this invading animal, and it was a really ugly fight, frightening, and with the blows with the wooden handle that he gave the creature, it was stunned, and the dogs began to beat the invading animal, and the beast, seeing that he wasn't going to win this fight against the caretaker and the dogs together, did something surprising, because this beast out of nowhere stood up as if it were a man, and at that moment, the foreman realized that it was a werewolf, and from that position, it managed to break free from the dogs that were trying to bite it. Cleverly, the creature jumped over the farm's wire fence, and then the werewolf ran with a limp across the wasteland and disappeared into the dark woods next to the property. The caretaker then hurried back to his house, grabbed his rifle and kept watch on the property until dawn, but he was sure the creature wouldn't come back, because the werewolf had been badly wounded. The foreman told me that this werewolf looked a bit like a man and a bit like a dog too, and that it had dark spiky hair all over its body, and that it had a snout and ears almost like a dog's, but that the creature's eyes were like lights, which would astonish anyone. After the caretaker told me this story, he warned me that this creature had marked him, and that it could certainly come back for revenge any day now, because the monster left very badly wounded. The fact of the matter was that after a few days, when the caretaker had gone through this, a police car began to pass by the farm, and they were driving slowly and seemed to be looking for clues, and perhaps they wanted to find out who had injured that man who had appeared all broken up and seriously injured near the farm. After a few days, the police soon stopped passing by the farm. But I also learned that the man they found wounded in the woods didn't die, and for the caretaker, this man was the one who had turned into a werewolf, who had burst into the farm with his dogs, and after the caretaker told me his whole story, I was a little apprehensive at the time, because the way this man told me his story, it really seemed like it was all true. And all of this came as a surprise to me, because I'd never had a conversation like this from someone who'd had a face-to-face experience with a werewolf. But it ended up being almost a month after that conversation with the caretaker, and I had forgotten all about the werewolf. But one day, when I was working normally on the farm, two men appeared at the gate of the property, and these two guys, who were around 40 years old, and they were looking for work on the farms in the region, so they said. The caretaker then talked to these guys, and said that at the moment the property wasn't in need of any new workers. But the farm dogs came to the gate, and started barking at these two guys. I found this strange, because the two Rottweilers were also afraid of these two men, and they barked very angrily, but the dogs kept their distance from the men, but soon after, these guys ended up leaving. The caretaker told me that he found it strange that these men were asking for jobs here on the farm, because he had never seen any of them in the area, and these suspicious men weren't rednecks. The caretaker became suspicious that these two men wanted something from the farm. But that day, I went out to the farm's pasture. Around 11 o'clock at night, I was walking around the farm to cool off from the strong heat it was getting at that time, and suddenly, I heard a thick and frightening howl, and it was the sound of some kind of animal, and this howl was coming from far away. I stopped walking and looked through the woods around the property, because I'd never heard anything like that before, but I carried on walking around the farm, and then I saw another one of those howls, but the strange thing was that now, this sound was coming from the other side of the farm, and this sound seemed to be closer to the property. And then I saw the dogs barking near the barbed wire fence, and the way the dogs were nervous, it seemed that there was something there. At this point, I started looking away from the dogs to see if I saw anything. At that moment, I started to hear several howls around the farm, and it seemed that these sounds were coming from all sides. I became very afraid and terrified of these noises, which seemed to be from several dangerous animals, and at that moment, when they were looking in the dark woods near the fence, everything started to change for the worse. I saw a strange huge figure in the middle of the woods, near the dogs. And the strange thing was that the animal's eyes looked like two lights on, and that image made me very frightened. I took a closer look and I was surprised, because that figure looked like an animal with big pointy ears. But it was a good thing that this creature was outside the farm's fence, but it was afraid to go near the fence because of the farm's dogs, which were very large. I immediately thought that it was the same animal that the caretaker had faced the other day. But even so, the other howls didn't stop around the farm, and the sounds came from all sides, and it seemed that there were several of these creatures close to us. Of course, I was frightened by all those noises. I felt I was in danger, so I didn't think twice, and ran to the caretaker's house, which was just inside the property, as I knew he had a shotgun. Arriving at the foreman's house, it was a good thing he was already awake, and he had realized that the werewolf had returned to take revenge for the beating he had received the other day. With that, the caretaker said that he would take his family to leave the farm, and at that moment, his wife and son got into the car, and so did I, to get us out of that place. As we were all already in the car, the caretaker started the car in a great hurry, and began to maneuver the car to get away from those creatures, and it was at that moment that I saw two figures coming towards the car we were in, and they were two hairy beasts, and one of them was standing like a man, and the other was on four legs like a dog, and it was a good thing that the caretaker managed to maneuver the car, and we started to drive away through the farm's pasture. I looked out of the car window, and I saw by the light of the lantern those two creatures standing up, and I was frightened by the appearance of those beasts, because they looked a lot like a dog, and their ears were big and pointed, and the eyes of those creatures reflected a kind of lead light, which was something frightening, and the body of those beings, although they were standing up like a man, the body of those werewolves was hairy. Then I realized that the caretaker's story was all true, and just as the caretaker was leaving the farm, another one of the creatures appeared on the way, in front of the car, and the caretaker threw the car at the werewolf to run it over, but the creature managed to dodge in time and escaped. And as soon as the car passed this werewolf, and the caretaker kept accelerating the car on the property's path, he ended up destroying and tearing down the wooden gate at the entrance to the farm, and with that, we arrived at the dirt road, and so we were already relieved. So, the caretaker continued driving the car along the roads, and from my thoughts, I was shocked to learn that there were werewolves, and also, the foreman said that he had no doubt that those three beasts were werewolves, and thinking about it, those werewolves had created a revenge plan to attack the property, because, while one of them lured the dogs near the fence, the other two beasts entered from the other side to take us by surprise, and it was certainly to kill us. After this event, the caretaker took me to my house, which was in a nearby neighborhood, and I spent the rest of the night inside my house, and the foreman drove his family to the house of one of his relatives who lived in the city. Even though I went through all that terror on the farm with the pack of werewolves, I still managed to get some sleep. When morning came, I went back to my work to ask for the accounts, because I didn't want to go through that risk again of bumping into those werewolves. And when I arrived at the farm, I was surprised, because there were two policemen there investigating what had happened, and my boss was worried and had no idea what had happened, but I also saw the two dogs from the farm that had been killed and torn to pieces by the werewolves, and this confirmed for me that those creatures had come to take revenge. And the fact is, I didn't hide anything. I told everything I knew to the police, who entered the Three Werewolves farm, and the caretaker, and I managed to escape by great luck. The police were confused by this frightening tale, but from the clues they found on the property, the closest logic to this tragedy is that it was an attack with several dangerous animals, in order to kill 2 large Rottweiler dogs. What's more, the caretaker also told the police the same story. In short, the caretaker and I only went to the police station once to answer the case, and then the deputy set a new date for the caretaker and I to return to the police station to give more evidence, as the police were still investigating the case. A few days later, the police called me and told me that I didn't need to go back to the police station anymore, and the police didn't say anything about the creatures I had reported. And to me, it seemed that the police wanted to hush up the case so that this information wouldn't reach the media, because there were no reports on television or radio about what had happened inside the farm. A few days later, something terrible happened in our neighborhood, because I heard on a news report that 3 young men had been shot dead inside a house, and what struck me most about this story was that these men had come from another city to work on a construction site in my town, and they had no police record. But I found this story strange, because one of the victims had already been found wounded in the woods a few weeks ago. I became suspicious of this story, so I went to talk to my friend, the caretaker, and he confirmed that one of the dead men was the same guy who was found in the bush the other time, and the other 2 who died were the 2 men who asked the caretaker for a job, but they were cousins and brothers from the same family. Well, the caretaker and I asked for the accounts of this farm, and to this day I keep thinking about this case. I can't come to any logical conclusion, and for me, what may have happened is that the caretaker together with the dogs beat up a werewolf, and then, or it could have been a family of werewolves who came back to take revenge, because the creature almost died on the farm, or it could have been something else that the caretaker did and didn't tell us about, because a whole pack of werewolves came after him. Anyway, over time I discovered that the caretaker disappeared to another town, because I never saw that man again, and this story has remained a secret with me until today, because I was very frightened by all the terrifying events, and as time went by, I began to suspect that those 2 men who came to ask the caretaker for a job on the farm might also have something to do with the werewolves who tried to catch us on the farm. But one thing I do know is that these werewolves do exist, and be careful, because sometimes they can even get together, like in 2s or 3s, to take revenge on someone. And that was my real-life horror story, which I went through with a pack of werewolves who tried to tear me apart. Well guys, if you liked the story, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Until the next video.